Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name's Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
This week we are talking about Chapter 6, just Chapter 6 in Stephen L. Kent's The Ultimate History of Video Games, which is an excellent book that you should buy. And we're kind of doing a little book club thing where we pick a chapter and talk about the chapter in it and kind of summarize it. But Chapter 6 is really long. Lots of times we're doing two episodes, 2 chapters per episode. But Chapter 6 is really long, so this whole episode is just about Chapter 6.
Yeah, we want to give it its due diligence because Chapter 6 is called A Rising Tide, which is for a good reason because this chapter opens us once again at E3 2001, but instead of focusing on hardware manufacturers like Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft, we're looking at studios, specifically a little barely known studio called Rockstar.
Small indie game studio called Rockstar.
Indie game studio called Rockstar. So, to give you some context, in 1997, Rockstar had its first hit with Grand Theft Auto, GTA. That's the original one, right? With the top-down, shooting guys, you're in a car. It's great.
Not many people played that one.
Not many
a lot of
played
people did play it, but like compared to what it would become.
Yeah, compared to what it's going to be, no one really... Like, it was a million seller at the time. Stephen L. Kent puts it out there that it was a million seller.
Yeah, it did well.
But then, Rockstar made 3 other GTA games. GTA London 1961... GTA London 1969, and GTA 2. They also had other games too, like Midnight Club and stuff, but we're just focusing on GTA right now. And this is important because when GTA 3 had a playable demo at E3 in 2001, most press people actually skipped over it to play the other Rockstar game called State of Emergency. And the whole point of State of Emergency is like, you start riots, essentially. I don't really know how the gameplay worked.
I remember people being hyped for this game. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I'm making that up. Maybe I'm just like remembering things that I don't actually remember, but I sort of remember people being hyped for this game.
I remember the name of this game,
yeah,
but I don't know if it really came out to much fanfare because it was overshadowed by GTA 3. But State of Emergency was essentially you'd like start riots and like build up, and it was almost like it was also a sandbox. Like you're in this city and you just start havoc essentially. By the way, we're not going to talk about the making of GTA 3 today. That it really isn't in the book at all. And actually, Stephen L. Kent points out, like in a footnote on page 111, that if you want to learn about the creation of GTA 3, you should read All Your Base Are Belong to Us by Harold Goldberg.
Yeah, there's another book too. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's by the same guy that wrote Masters of Doom. And he has a book that he wrote on Rockstar and GTA specifically, I think, that I've been meaning to read as well.
Well, we're just going to keep adding these books to the list.
Add it to the list.
This is, if people like this format, then we're just going to go with this format. And it's great for us because, we don't have to do a lot of internet sleuthing. It feels good. So what we're going to discuss in this chapter in particular, especially at the beginning here, is the shift in gaming to more adult content and also kind of an entirely new format, that format being the open world game. And there's a really good quote. This is on page 112 and 113, like it kind of goes on the other page. I think it's from Sony. It doesn't really attribute it to anyone. And this is just the quote. I'll just read it right here. So, quote, "The relevant audience for video gaming has been expanding over time as evidenced by the increasingly larger installed bases of hardware and the increasingly higher peak revenue years. What began as a market for children with the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985 has evolved into a mass market with revenues that rival movie box office receipts. Several milestones were reached in 2000, including the sale of the 100 millionth Game Boy system." That's pretty crazy.
That's a lot of Game Boys.
"And 60 million PSXs, the original PlayStation, sold globally. In the US, the cumulative sales of 32 to 64-bit machines reached 40 million, the highest yet during the cycle. According to Sony's cumulative data, about 57% of PSX primary users are over 18 years of age." That is the most important part of this long quote I just read, is that most people playing video games now are 18 and older. And that is the big shift. And that's why GTA 3 was a real right place, right time video game.
Sure was.
Because this is exactly what people wanted. And even what's funny is actually in the book, they talk about Trip Hawkins, the creator of the 3DO in 1998. And he was going to market his games to, quote, readers of Playboy. Like, that's what he would say, like readers of Playboy magazines who were looking for. But he was just a couple years ahead of his time, realistically. You know, if he'd have done that 3 years later, he could have had huge success, I feel like, because when GTA 3 came out, the timing was perfect. And GTA 3 was just the beginning of that trend. So there's a quote, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Nguy Kroll. It's N''Gai Croal, Kroll. And he talks about GTA 3 and like what it meant to him. And he says, quote, "There was something about the way that game delivered freedom, being able to walk around and drive through an open world that in some ways felt fairly quotidian, sort of modeled in its own way on the real world. You're listening to radio stations that are in your car that are playing the same songs you might listen to on the radio in your own car. You're living this outlaw life, and the world responds to you, pedestrians respond to you, and the police respond to you. There are missions, but it's not levels and goals in the way that you saw in traditional games. It felt like a place you could go to. I think that was powerful and intoxicating for people." And yeah, GTA 3 like is just huge because it's bringing you into a world, I think. And that's what made video gaming to even larger masses. Because before this, like everyone said, like, well, we're marketing to children, but no, now we're making games for grown adults. And that involves like living a whole nother life. And in this case, the life of like an outlaw criminal. We've all played GTA 3, right? I played GTA 3. Tyler, you played GTA 3? Yeah.
Yep.
One thing they don't touch on in the book, and I think this might have been only an Xbox feature when the Xbox version of GTA 3 came out way later, was you could play your songs installed on your Xbox on the GTA. Did you ever do that?
No, I didn't play the Xbox version back in the day. I mostly played the PS2 version.
See, I played the Xbox version because I was an Xbox guy and I was like, oh my gosh, it's coming out. I'm so excited. And then I was listening to like what was in like hot in 2003. Incubus? Probably Incubus. That's what I was listening to. Maybe Red Hot Chili Peppers. A little By the Way. Is that too early?
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, I was super into it. So,
By the way, no, that's 2003.
That is 2003? That's probably what I listened to. Yeah, I was super into it. But what's funny though, is I was kind of depriving myself of how good the radio stations in GTA 3 are. Like that's where you get Laszlo, right? Isn't that the the radio guy, the talk radio host? Oh, it's so good. Think you're like a famous radio host in a video game is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like
I think that guy does other stuff at Rockstar. He's like the Laszlo thing was like a side gig for him, I think.
That's great.
Like Three Dog, you were saying?
Oh, I love Three Dog from Fallout 3. Yeah, it's fantastic. So there's this great passage in the book about how Kent compares Shigeru Miyamoto and Dan Houser of GTA 3's like styles and how they design video games. And it's cool because they both actually do kind of the same thing, just in different ways. So Shigeru Miyamoto's whole thing was like making a landscape and then looking for activities to do and then adding secrets to it. And really, Dan Houser is doing the same thing, just on a much bigger scale with this new open world video game. And I highly recommend you get the book, just for like that little passage alone was like really good. And there's just so much to talk about with GTA 3. But if you don't know, if you've never played GTA 3, you play in Liberty City, which was a huge area for the time. It's kind of like New York City. It's just got little changes to it.
It's so small now too, like compared to the bigger GTA maps and like just other open world games. It's like really, really tiny, but it's funny.
Oh yeah, but you just have to know at the time. Big. Yeah, at the time it was mind blowing. And then you'd have like different neighborhoods and districts to explore, and you had cars and radio stations that you listen to in your car, and you'd like get different ones. It was just so cool, and it's fantastic, right? It sells like hotcakes and gangbusters, and everyone's into it, and no one's mad, right?
Right.
Wrong.
Dang it.
So here comes Senator Joseph Lieberman.
Didn't we get rid of this guy like 10 years before this?
Yeah, Mortal Kombat 1993 is where the last time we heard about him talking about violence in video games. So he's railing against that. Nothing really happens because it always goes that way. But in Australia, Grand Theft Auto 3 actually gets a, quote, refused classification thrown on it, meaning it cannot be sold there.
Oh, wow.
So it's not
they
on
wouldn't
sale.
rate it, and you can't sell things that aren't rated in Australia, I guess?
I think so. I think that's the way it works. This is the one that was pretty... I didn't know about this until I read it in the book just now. There was a $246 million lawsuit filed against Sony, Rockstar, and Walmart after two stepbrothers, William Buckner, who was 16, and Josh Buckner, who was 14, fired .22 caliber rifles into traffic just randomly,
Holy
killing
moly.
a 45-year-old man named Aaron Hamill and injuring a 19-year-old named Kimberly Bede.
Oh, my gosh.
And the suit was dropped after the courts refused to hear the case because you just can't. I think their whole argument was, how can you connect those
they
two
were
things?
trying to say that Rockstar somehow made them do it or something?
Yeah, it was the same thing with like the Columbine lawsuits of like, your doom made my kids do that. You know, you can't do that. So even with all this, though, GTA 3 is selling like gangbusters and hotcakes. The game released on October 22nd, 2001, and by the end of December, Rockstar has sold 1.9 million copies. That's right.
Wow.
They beat Madden in 2 months and sold 1.9 million copies.
I bet
making
those
it the top selling game of the year.
I bet those lawsuits actually like help sell more of the game. Like I remember when the hot coffee thing happened with San Andreas, and the game just continued flying off the shelves. Like those kinds of things, those things never work. You know what I mean? Like it just gives the game more publicity, more free publicity.
Yep. Like any press is good press to these games as they sell. So that's just kind of the way it is. So there's actually a really good line from Kent on this on page 118. And he just says, Halo, and kind of summing up like GTA's impact on this, GTA 3's impact. It's Halo Combat Evolved, and more important, Halo 2, were the catalyst that brought console games online. But Grand Theft Auto 3 defined an entire generation of video games, which I think is totally true, because think of all the open world games right now. Like, that's Ubisoft's entire catalog.
Yep. Every single one of those games can trace inspiration or something back to Grand Theft Auto 3. And I know Grand Theft Auto 3 wasn't like the first open world game, but it was the first one to really nail it.
Yeah, and for sure. They just really rocked it.
Yeah, it's like the Super Mario Brothers of side-scrolling platformer games, right? Like Super Mario Brothers wasn't the first side-scrolling platformer game, probably, but every side-scrolling platformer that comes out even today can be traced back to Super Mario Brothers, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's just so good. So now, video game designers in 2001 are getting the same level of respect as like movie directors. They even say that Dan Houser and Leslie Benzies, who were the people that designed and created GTA 3, were like being compared to Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. Just like, ooh. So while this is going on with GTA 3, you might be asking yourself, what's going on with Sega and Nintendo? You know, Sonic and Mario. What's going on with them? Well, things at Sega are pretty tough, which is pretty much going to be this whole book, I feel like. Anytime they talk about Sega, we're going to be like, ew, it's pretty tough. So essentially, Peter Moore, the president of Sega, leaves Sega, actually, and gets a job somewhere else. And then Vice President Mike Fisher, who it's important to know is fluent in Japanese. Like, he can speak full-on Japanese, totally great, goes to Japan to explain to Yuji Naka, creator of Sonic, Yu Suzuki, the creator of Shenmue, and Hisao Oguchi, creator of Crazy Taxi, that Sega needed to grow up with their audience and try to like make games to an older audience. And guess what? They were pretty resistant to the idea. That's
so interesting, because in the early 90s, that was how they differentiated themselves from Nintendo. Was they were like, we're the grown-up console for, you know, your older brother or whatever. Like that was like, so they sort of positioned themselves as like the edgy kid, right? And now they're reluctant to continue growing up with those people. That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's all different people, so yeah, you know, but it's just
really
interesting
odd
to me.
There's a quote on 121 from Mike Fisher. He goes, quote, "The story I had heard, I believe I heard it from him, was that Yuji Naka had always wanted to work at Nintendo and didn't make it and came to Sega instead. During his time at Sega, he was one of the people who believed the most in the Nintendo ethos that games could be family-friendly entertainment. I remember once making the case that Sega needed to be open to having more mature-themed games. And Naka being so upset, literally having little fluffy spit bubbles on the corner of his mouth saying, 'You just want to make us porn. Is that what you're saying?' End quote." Aww. So that's how resistant they are to.
There's a middle ground, Yuji Naka. There's a middle ground.
There is. Yeah, there is. Like, I think it's more just like making games that are more of a theme that would appeal to teenagers. It's not even like violence as much as like, because you can make racing games that are just like appeal to an older audience.
Right. There's like goofy racing games for like small children, and then there's like a more serious, like a Forza, which is not for kids. Not that a kid can't play Forza, but like it's not designed for kids, right?
Yeah.
And it's also not inappropriate for children either. Like it's a racing game.
Exactly. And so while this is going on at Sega, like they need to grow their audience. They're having like an identity crisis. Peter Moore leaves. But at Nintendo, there's also some people leaving. So Howard Lincoln, beloved chairman, stepped down in 2000 to become the CEO of my beloved Seattle Mariners baseball team.
My, oh my.
My, oh my, indeed. Oh, that's a great little reference there, Tyler. Okay, so Minoru Arakawa takes over, and we've talked about him before. He was actually the son-in-law of Nintendo chairman Hiroshi Yamauchi, and he had big shoes to fill because Howard Lincoln had been with Nintendo of America since the beginning of 1981. Like, he was there in the beginning as a lawyer at first, remember? And now he's stepping down. So what does Nintendo do? What any other company tries to do when it's having an identity problem, try to look cool with famous celebrities of the time.
That's what I do when I'm having an identity problem, is I try to look cool with famous celebrities of the time.
I know, you've told me this and you've done it so many times. So just like times. Tyler, Nintendo went to had a big event
Yep.
On October
Threw a big
24th,
party.
2002, in Hollywood, with the likes of Leonardo DiCaprio,
Yep.
Christina Aguilera,
Check.
Colin Farrell, Alicia
Yep.
Silverstone. All the people that Tyler has hung out with in the past when he tries to look cool.
Those are the people I was
crisis.
hanging out with when I had an identity crisis. All of them. Yep.
Yeah, there's actually a really funny side story about how someone tried to talk to Leonardo DiCaprio and he just really wanted to play the video games. Like, that's why he was there. And I'm like, hell yeah, Leo. That's for us. That's awesome. So on the surface, it worked. Like, the Nintendo's looking cool. They're getting positive press. But internally, there are some really big issues going on because GameCube was losing to both Microsoft and PS2. GameCube sales were 200,000 consoles behind Xbox in the US, and PlayStation 2 was on a whole nother level. They were just crushing everyone. There are actually some pretty crazy stats on pages 126 and 127. I'm not going to read them all, but the one that sums it up the best about the discrepancy is on page 127, where it says, quote, by the end of 2002, Sony had shipped 38 million PlayStation 2 consoles. GameCube had a slight lead over Xbox worldwide at 7.2 million to 6.4 million. That's right. So Sony had sold 30 million more than either other company.
Jeez.
Like, that's just so much. So that's how big of the window was that Sony was just crushing both Microsoft and GameCube. And it's funny, too, because 7.2 million and 6.4 million are not bad numbers.
No. I have a question then, and this is maybe it could be a discussion question at some point, but like, do these kinds of console wars, because they're always pitched as a war, as if it's a zero-sum game where someone wins and someone loses, like, is selling fewer than the competition actually a failure? Or what, like, are there other metrics we should judge this by? Like, you could judge it by money made, and yeah, units sold contributes to money made, but if Sony and Microsoft are losing money on every single Xbox and PlayStation sold, and Nintendo's making money on every GameCube, like, does that even out in the end? Maybe they sell fewer GameCubes, so they actually made more money. I don't know those numbers, but I often wonder if this, like, people always say, like, GameCube lost that generation as if, like, Nintendo's lost money during that time. Like, I think they still made a butt ton of money. Like, there's a lot of money in video games, and I don't think anybody lost any money during that time except maybe Sega.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the really thing, you're going to talk about it later on, but, like, there's also some real banger games on GameCube.
Yeah.
Like, you got Wind Waker, you got Melee, you got all sorts of cool games that are coming out. So, like, for gaming, I don't think GameCube was a loss at all. Like,
if
our
you bought a
favorite Mario
GameCube,
Kart
you
Double
didn't.
Dash.
Right. If you bought a GameCube in 2002, you didn't feel bad about that. There were tons of great games to play, and the hits just kept coming. Now, maybe you could have got more hits if you'd bought an Xbox or PS2. That's all that's all subjective enough for debate. But it's hard to say. Like, I try to think about these console wars as, like, they're not zero sum. Nobody loses. It's not like Nintendo went out of business because they didn't sell as many GameCubes. They still sold a ton of GameCubes, right?
Yeah, and we talked about the whole cash nest egg that they had that I can't stop thinking about. So Nintendo's not losing. Also, wasn't Pikmin premiering on GameCube?
Yeah, I don't know when the first one came out. It was pretty early on.
That was popular, right?
Yeah,
it was different. It was a different kind of game.
Yeah, it was different. I don't know how popular it was, but I think it was okay.
It was popular enough for me to remember in 2021, and that's all that matters to me. So, all right. So, clearly this is going on where they're technically losing, and Nintendo executives are not happy. So, it's time to talk about our favorite thing, corporate gossip and corporate scheming, which is a big pattern that we see here. And it turns out, like, in Japanese culture, corporate culture, I should say, according to the book, it's like the higher ups always find someone to blame.
Yeah, and it's never their fault. It's always somebody below them that made the call.
Yeah. And so, the famous one that they mention in the book is how when the Virtual Boy did not do well in 1996, Hiroshi Yamauchi put it all on Gunpei Yokoi, who was the father of the Game Boy, and he actually got thrown to some, like, weird department where he sat for a year, and then he just left the company because he just quit.
Yeah, and they don't fire people either, or at least Nintendo didn't at the time. They didn't fire them. They put them somewhere else where they would eventually decide to leave on their own.
Yeah, so, like, essentially what's going on now is because no one's there, like, Howard Lincoln's gone, things have all shook up. So they shake things up even more. So what they do is Tatsumi Kimishima, who was originally the president of Pokemon USA, replaced Arakawa as the president of Nintendo of America. And then Nintendo of Canada's president, Peter McDougall, replaced Peter Main. And then Main and McDougall were like totally different. And it was just like very different styles. So everything got switched up and thrown away. And like they talk about this in the book more heavily about like corporate culture and how it went. But then Tyler, I think I'll talk about it in a bit too. I think they go into that a little bit, right? In these next games. But like this just completely shakes up Nintendo. So not only are they behind in GameCube sales, but now internally things are getting all flip-flopped and confused. Mm-hmm. So on page 126, there's that I just mentioned that quote about the shakeup and stuff. And this whole section is like pretty interesting to me because we talk about corporate gossip a lot on here, which is like our new podcast. It's to be just Codex, a history of corporate gossip in video games. But this really I never even thought about like Gunpei Yokoi created the Game Boy.
Yeah, the dude
and you're
was
just
like
gonna throw him
right
because it's Virtual Boy. That's man, it just is so ruthless when you think about it.
Oh, that's like they really did him dirty because he made the freaking Game Boy. Like, come on.
Yeah, and Game Boy, I mean, at this point, we just talked about that at the beginning of the chapter, the crazy amount of Game Boys they made. It's just...
Yeah. Oh. So it's crazy. Like, so Nintendo's like, they're kind of in a bad spot at this point, right? Because like they had all those people leaving, and I don't necessarily blame all those people for leaving. This is as good a time as any, I guess. Like Arakawa, Howard Lincoln, and Peter Main had all been around for a really long time, even if Arakawa hadn't been president that long yet, it sounds like, because he took over fairly recently at this point.
Yeah, it was like, it sounds like it was like a year, honestly. It was a year or two because it was from 2000 to 2001 or 2002. It wasn't very long at all.
Yeah, so like they've been around for a while. GameCube's not doing so well. They've got golden parachutes. Probably they're eyeing that beach and they're like, nah, you know what? I'm out. Good luck with this, big dogs. Like, you take care of this GameCube business. But the problem is that after this, there was like kind of a revolving door of replacements. So there's Tatsumi Kimishima, who became the president of Nintendo of America. Before this, he was president of Pokemon USA, like you said earlier. And then Peter McDougall took over for Peter Main in Canada. And they had the same first name, but they had very different management styles, which didn't really help in that transition. So you've got leadership shakeups. You've got a console that's underperforming in the competition, and none of that is ideal. Like the GameCube hadn't sold as many units as the other systems, but Nintendo still had trouble keeping it in stock. So that's something that I wonder about too then. Like, okay, so Nintendo's not selling as many, but they literally can't keep the GameCube in stock because they can't make enough of them. So like, would things have been different if they'd been able to fill demand?
Yeah, isn't Nintendo... Well, they do it with games where they're known for under-publishing an amount of games.
Yeah, especially during those days. I don't know if they do that so much anymore, but definitely during those days they did.
But I mean, didn't they do that with... It wasn't Super Mario 3D All-Stars? They said they printed a limited number of copies of that, right?
That's
that was
true.
said.
Yeah, but they explicitly said that, like, we're only going to do this for however long they said they were going to do it for, and then they were going to stop. In the past, they've just, like, sort of just not made very many of a game and not really explained it. But the GameCube, like, I don't know if they had manufacturing problems or what, but it's like, it's hard to, they say we're not selling very many GameCubes, but it's like, we're selling every single GameCube that we can make. So maybe would they have sold more than the Xbox if they could have put them out of the factory faster? Like, it's kind of hard to tell, but the book does mention that there was like a not insignificant group of people who would go to the store to buy a GameCube and they leave with the PS2 because they get to the store, they got no GameCubes, so they just buy the PS2 instead, because by this point, PS2 had been out nearly 2 years, and it was just everywhere. You can find it whenever.
Also,
plus, it had
it's
games.
hard to,
PS2 had tons of games,
and PS2 is just like was just awesome. Like the whole like the menu in the front. Yep. Like I have very like big because it was very user intuitive. Like it was so great that console, and it's good because again, right place, right time. People that don't play video games are getting into consoles, and you have one that has a really good interface to it. Very simple. And it's like you put a disc in, just auto plays it. If not, you can click around the other places. Oh, yeah. I like the PlayStation 2 a lot, you know?
Yeah, Sony's lead with the PS2, like, it just got bigger and bigger because they had a year head start, almost 2 year head start on the Xbox and GameCube, which is interesting. That's another, like, it's just a right place, right time thing because the Dreamcast had a year head start on the PS2, but it wasn't enough of a jump from the PlayStation 1 and N64 and Saturn that people wanted to upgrade. Plus, I mean, we've talked about the death of the Dreamcast a lot, but it's interesting that like that year head start sometimes helps out a lot, but there is a point where it becomes too much as well. Like it worked for the Xbox 360 as well, although maybe not by the end of that generation. I think the PS3 gained some steam, but the Xbox 360 had a year head start, and it was dominating during that generation. Well, compared to the PlayStation 3, that when we get to the next generation, like all bets are off as soon as the Wii comes out because it just like takes off. But that's
the Wii just which is funny when you think about how they lost the GameCube generation and then they destroy the next generation.
Yeah, like they destroy it so hard that it's not even worth it to compare, right? Like they're just the generation is Xbox versus PlayStation 3, and when people say, "Oh, but what about the Wii?" We say, "Yeah, the Wii is on another level. We don't even think about it anymore because it's just printing money for Nintendo." Anyway, we go back to this generation, the beginnings of the GameCube, Xbox, PlayStation 2 generation. So, yeah, PS2 had games too. When people go to the store to buy their GameCube, they could pick up a PS2 and they could pick up GTA 3. And then the 1 year after GTA 3, remember how fast they used to put out GTA games? We had GTA Vice City,
which is my favorite GTA.
Yeah, it's my favorite of that era. I think overall I like 5 the best just because it's so Los Angeles centric, and I just love that.
But I didn't play that when I lived in LA, and now I'm wondering if I played it again, if I get more.
I did the same thing. I first played it when I first moved to LA, and it didn't resonate as much with me then. But I think now that I know the city a lot better, and it's been several years later, I really want to give it another playthrough because I think it would really, like the little bits that I've played here and there, in more recent years, like I'm just like, oh yeah, I recognize all of these things. Like there's the Griffith Observatory, and there's the Santa Monica Pier and all that stuff. Oh, I love GTA 5.
Do they have that Angel Flight in GTA 5?
Probably.
A little tram? They probably do. They're so detailed. I need to play that game again. Yeah, the problem is, like, I can't just play a GTA game. I feel like I got to put my whole heart and soul into it.
Yeah, that's a long game.
It's a very long game, but it's so fun. It's so good.
Yeah. Anyway, so back in these days, we used to see a GTA game a year almost for a few years there. So we got Vice City in 2002, which had the best soundtrack by far of any GTA game. GTA 3 came out on PC, and then both titles came out a year later on Xbox in 2003. So we got GTA 3 and Vice City on Xbox in the dual pack. Remember, you could buy them together.
That's what I had.
Yeah.
Also, GTA Vice City was so fun because I got all the hidden packages in that game. And when you get those, you get like things left at your mansion. So you just always have guns, and you always have helicopter and like cars. Yeah. I went real hard into GTA Vice City, and I am a big fan of it.
Love it. You can play it on your phone now.
Yeah, I could be Tommy Vercetti on my phone.
Yeah. So GTA went from being the biggest game in the world exclusively on PlayStation 2 to being the biggest game in the world exclusively not on the GameCube. It was on everything else but the GameCube, which was kind of a 1-2 punch that set the GameCube back even further.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's true. And
it
now
was everywhere but GameCube.
I think Nintendo's gotten a lot better with Switch about letting these third-party games come up. They come later, usually, than when they're dropped, but they do arrive eventually.
Yeah,
like they got
not
BioShock.
GTA.
Yeah, but they got all the BioShock games on there and like
That's
a bunch
true.
of other stuff too.
And
but
those BioShock games did come out about the same time they were getting remastered for the more recent consoles as well, right?
So that's nice for Nintendo to realize. They learned from their mistake, maybe,
Yeah, I hope so. So the GameCube definitely had games, but sometimes you want that one specific game. And GTA 3 and GTA Vice City were cultural phenomena that brought gamers into the fold. Like people would play these games that weren't gamers before, and then they played GTA and they were like, oh yes, I get it now. I understand why people love games. And there's like a whole new generation of gamers, of people being turned into gamers by the GTA games, and they're being turned into gamers on the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox and not the GameCube. And those people had the gamer in their soul awakened, which I believe everybody has. I believe everybody has a gamer in their soul. Like that They Might Be Giants song, but a gamer instead of a birdhouse.
That's good. That's not a stretch at all. It totally makes sense.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
I also agree with you that there's people always have. There's people that like everyone has a game. They just don't know it. You know, if my stepmom she didn't know probably how much she loved Bejeweled games, but she does now,
Yeah.
And like, hey, it's a video game. It counts. It's great. Whether it's on your phone or whether it's a super high powered PC. Yep. Everyone's got a gamer in it. That's a beautiful
My mom plays
thing,
a lot of Bejeweled, a lot of Mahjong on her iPad. She's real big on Mahjong.
Yeah, I'm not very good at Mahjong.
Me neither.
I also don't entirely understand Mahjong. So maybe your mom could give us lessons. Could she give us tutorials? Okay.
Yeah, we'll have her teach us.
Thank you.
Okay, so Nintendo had new leadership at this time, and they saw a little bit of which way the wind was blowing, this new leadership. They joined forces with Capcom to get some games. Gotta get some games. And they wanted those mature games that the kids would talk about playing these games. So they announced 5 games, which are referred to as the Capcom 5, which is an actual article title on Wikipedia, the Capcom 5.
The Capcom 5, wow.
Yeah. So it consisted of PN03, I believe that is product number 03, which was a third-person shooter that was very hyped and it came out to be just mediocre, I guess. Beautiful Joe, which is a very beautiful side-scrolling platform, which got a sequel.
I have not heard of Beautiful Joe in a very long time.
Yeah, it got a sequel. That one was very well received. Beautiful Joe did super, super well. There was a game called Dead Phoenix, which never saw the light of day. I think it got canceled. And then Killer 7, which remains a cult classic to this day. I think that game was Suda51's first game, too, if I'm not mistaken, Killer 7.
Oh, I've heard of Killer 7. I never played it, but I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah, yeah. And then there was the big one, Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil had been gaining a lot of traction as a survival horror franchise in the years leading up. Resident Evil 1, 2, and I believe 3 was also on the original PlayStation, if I'm not mistaken. But Resident Evil 4 was like sort of it wasn't a reboot of the series, but it was like they changed the gameplay to be a really third-person shooter feeling to it. And the game series was really going to take off in a big way because of Resident Evil 4. And so of those 5 games, the Capcom 5, only Resident Evil was supposed to be exclusive to the GameCube. The rest were just timed exclusives and they would come out later. Well, the Capcom Alliance did not last very long. Beautiful Joe, Killer 7, and Resident Evil 4 all saw PS2 releases less than a year later, which was kind of a stab in the back, and I don't think Nintendo was expecting that.
Wow, Capcom, rude.
Yeah. Yeah, and ironically, but not, but unsurprisingly, I guess, Resident Evil 4 sold better on the PS2 than it did on the GameCube, which it was supposed to be an exclusive for, that feels bad. You can still find copies of Resident Evil 4 that have that like tag, the only on GameCube tag in the top left corner, even though it was very short-lived. They might still, I don't know if they ever stopped, if there are any like versions of the GameCube Resident Evil 4 that don't have that tag on them, but it is far from an exclusive now. It's on PC. The Wii re-release of Resident Evil 4 is where it was at, though, because that was when like the pointing to shoot things was still very novel.
Oh, I think when we were talking about our theater green room in college where Tyler and I went to school, and there was a person playing Resident Evil 4 on Wii in that green room during a tech weekend. I remember that. I watched it. I'm like, this game looks scary. I can't play this, but it looks fun to watch.
Very spooky. But for a long time, that was the best version of the game because aiming with the Wii remote was actually really, really good. Especially for a game like Resident Evil where you have to stop when you're shooting anyway.
I kind of regret not playing Skyward Sword HD with motion controls. I could switch over, but I've gotten too used to it now. Like, I'm loving the Pro Controller, so I'm like, but I get it. I understand now. Motion controls are cool.
Yeah. Pro Controller is very good, though.
It is a really cool controller.
Yeah. So Capcom's games, though, weren't the only things that Nintendo was losing to the competition. Ken Lobb, who was the head of Nintendo of America's Treehouse, he left for Microsoft. The Treehouse is the group of people that like localize games at Nintendo of America, so they translate and they like kind of change gameplay stuff to fit other audiences. He is the person that the Klob, which is a gun in GoldenEye 007, and I think it's in Perfect Dark as well. It's like a secret gun, maybe in Perfect Dark. The Klob is named after him, K-Lob.
Dude,
Ken Lobb.
What's fantastic is I wrote down, we got to mention this if Tyler does it. And then I'm like, I bet you Tyler will, though. And he does. You
got
did.
it.
And it's so good. I love the Klob. And I think you're right. I think it is in Perfect Dark.
Yeah, I think it's like a secret gun. There's a lot of GoldenEye stuff in Perfect Dark that's like secret.
I mean, like the facility level is renamed Felicity. So they don't even try. They're like, here comes a bunch of GoldenEye stuff, which is good because they made both games and it's essentially the same game, just a different story and everything. Yeah. So it's fine.
So the Klob, that's a little bit of trivia there. It was Ed Freeze who got Ken Lobb to defect to Microsoft. And Shane Kim talks about how they needed Ken's experience because when Microsoft had experience themselves in games, but they didn't have many seasoned veterans of the console wars that like Ken Lobb brought. And so the quote here is that he brought great perspective and experience with respect to game development. He wasn't always right, but nobody is when it comes to game development. And so he was a big pickup for Microsoft. The other thing that Microsoft got right around this time, we're looking at 2002-ish era, Rare. Now, we didn't finish our series on Rare here. We never got this far when we were talking about Rare, so we may have to circle back to this in a future Codex episode. But you might ask yourself, how was it that Rare left Nintendo? Didn't Nintendo own Rare? Well, yes and no. They owned 49% of Rare, which was sort of their usual MO when it came to buying studios. They never bought them outright, but they bought enough of them to control them. So I guess Microsoft bought the other 51%, which made Nintendo want to sell their 49% stake. I don't know how buying companies works, but Microsoft bought Rare somehow, and Nintendo made a whole bunch of money off of it, actually. Because
they mentioned in the book how a contract expired, and then Nintendo wanted to re-up their contract, which gave them that control with that 49% stake. And then Rare counter-offered, or Nintendo counter-offered, and one of them rejected it. And then that kind of opened the door for Microsoft to purchase Rare.
Yeah.
So I believe that's what happened.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Rare published one last game for Nintendo, Star Fox Adventures, which I think is actually a neat game that I'd like to play through someday. It's kind of it's a Star Fox, it's like a Zelda game that's themed. It has some Star Fox themes in it. You play as Fox McCloud and it has some other Star Fox references in it. It was originally known as Dinosaur Planet, which
is an awesome name for a game.
It is, yeah. And it recently got leaked, like the Nintendo 64 version of Dinosaur Planet got leaked, and that was before Star Fox was a part of it at all. So that's like an interesting bit of video game lore, I think, is playing that original Dinosaur Planet for Nintendo 64.
I'm going to look up YouTube videos of that right after this.
Do it. Yeah, it was like recent. It was like within the past year or so that I think it came out, or that it leaked to the internet. So Microsoft may have bought Rare, but they didn't get a lot of the IP that Rare worked on. Obviously, Nintendo still held on to the rights to Donkey Kong, and that included the extended Donkey Kong universe, like all the Kongs that were invented for the Donkey Kong Country series. There were a couple of characters that they did not get the rights to. Banjo, who was first introduced in Diddy Kong Racing, and Conker, who was also introduced in Diddy Kong Racing. I love that Banjo is in Diddy Kong Racing because that was before Banjo-Kazooie. And I just love that he's like just a side character in that game. So they got Banjo and Conker, and then they also got to keep Killer Instinct, Battletoads, Blast Corps, and Perfect Dark. So Battletoads just got a new game in the series relatively recently, within the last year or so, I want to say. And Perfect Dark has a new game coming out at some point it's been announced.
And that's the quadruple A studio that they're talking about.
Quadruple A studio.
Quadruple.
Okay.
The more A's you add to it, the cooler the game is.
Yeah, that's how that works. Okay.
Little do people know
cool.
that Tyler and I are making a quintuple A game.
We're working on it. We're going to get Leonardo DiCaprio. We're going to get Alicia Silverstone. We're getting Colin Farrell. All of those people that I was friends with when I was going through my identity crisis. They're going to be at this quintuple A studio.
Leonardo DiCaprio is John Glames. That's what we're going to do.
Oh, man. I'm loving this.
Yeah.
Okay, but in 2002, Rare signed a deal with Microsoft after they were purchased by Microsoft to produce 5 games in 2 years for the Xbox, which didn't really work out as well as they'd hoped. Those games took a lot longer than 2 years to make. But they did make a bunch of games for the original Xbox. So the book here goes on to talk about how Nintendo felt about the buyout. There's a quote from Howard Lincoln here. He says, "Thank you so much for taking that off our hands." This is quoted by Mike Fisher when he talked to Howard Lincoln. It's like Mike Fisher thought he was just being salty about having lost one of their biggest studios and trying not to make a big deal out of it. He's like, it's like, "Oh, go ahead and take it. We didn't want it anyway." And like secretly, he's like crying in the corner probably that he lost Rare.
Howard Lincoln just crying. "I'm gonna miss you, Conker." Oh.
Yeah. That Conker 12 Tales. Or not 12 Tales. What was the name? There's Bad Fur Day, but what was the game that it was gonna? I think it was called 12 Tales, a Conker story that they never came out with, and then it got rebooted into Bad Fur Day.
See, I never played Bad Fur Day. I don't even know what it's about.
It is so worth it. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you that you've never played Conker's Bad Fur Day. You should play the original Xbox version, Live and Reloaded, for the single player. It plays on Xbox One. It is just phenomenal.
Is that a part of Rare Replay?
It is. I think it's the Nintendo 64 version you get in Rare Replay, which is the same game, so it's worth it. Live and Reloaded is an original Xbox game that it looks beautiful. Like, it is really, really good graphics for an original Xbox game. It looks almost like a 360 game. But if you play the original N64 version in Rare Replay, it's super worth it. And that game it's like a 3D platformer like Banjo-Kazooie or something, like the games that Rare was making at the time. But it's rated M, so take from that what you want.
So I gotta wear earplugs while I play it.
That's right. And I guess the
Okay.
N64 version has less censoring than the Xbox
it has
remake.
less censoring?
Less, yeah. They censored more in the
Wow.
Xbox remake, so maybe that is the version to play. But oh boy, that is an adventure that I am excited for you to take.
All right, I'll add it to my list of
Yeah.
the long list of games I need to play in my life.
Add it to the list, yeah. Okay, so back to the GameCube, though, which wasn't looking great by the end of 2002. It had a lack of third-party games, which was like probably a large reason of that. They didn't have a ton of big-name multi-platform games. Like the PS2 and Xbox would get all kinds of games that the GameCube didn't get, partially probably because of Nintendo's like stringent kind of content things. They weren't very helpful to developers that wanted to make more mature games, and the discs didn't hold as much data, so it was... Like the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2 both used full-size DVDs, so they had the same amount of storage space. You would have to port your game to the GameCube. If you needed more storage space than the 1.5 gigs that the GameCube disc provided, you were either doing multiple discs or you were doing a lot of work to compress that data down. And so it was a lot more work for some developers. And so a lot of games just didn't end up showing up on the GameCube. So instead of trying to plug this hole in their lineup, Nintendo went the opposite way. They decided to double down on first-party exclusives, which I actually think is a really good idea and one of Nintendo's strengths that they still heavily play to, and I think that's the right strategy.
I mean, yeah, that's why I bought a Switch, because I wanted to play Nintendo games. So totally, it totally works.
Yep. And the nice thing about those is they know they can make these games. They know they can kind of control them. So they did. In the 9 months after E3 in 2002, Nintendo launched Mario Sunshine, Metroid Prime, Mario Party 4, Star Fox Adventures, and Animal Crossing. Plus, Sega delivered a port of Sonic Adventure 2, which was previously a Dreamcast exclusive, and Capcom ported the first 2 Resident Evil games. Or they did Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil, and I think Resident Evil 2 got a port. I'm not sure what the timeline of those games is, but they ported a bunch of Resident Evil games to the GameCube. And those are still exclusives, those remakes are. Kent goes on to make the case that they ruined Star Fox with Star Fox Adventures because Fox was a pilot and putting him in third person on the ground in Adventures didn't really sit right with gamers, and all the on-foot missions were the worst part of Star Fox Assault, which came out a few years later, which was like more of a traditional Star Fox game, but it had a bunch of on-foot sections that were not great. I still think that game was solid. Star Fox Adventures, I think both of those games were okay, but I think Assault would have generally not been good either way. I like it, but I know that a lot of people don't, and I think they're probably justified. I just love Star Fox. I think if they had just released Star Fox Adventures as Dinosaur Planet, though, I think it would have just faded into even deeper obscurity. I don't think it would have done better without the Star Fox license, because I think it was okay on its own, but it was like an average game, and the Star Fox licenses was the only thing that made it interesting to me today. It's the one that's the reason I want to play it today, is because it has Star Fox in it, and if it didn't, I don't think I'd be interested at all. So that's just me.
I can't believe you just disagreed with friend of the podcast, Stephen.
I did.
Kent.
I
mean,
disagree with you, Stephen L. Kent.
We might have to have our first ever Codex debate moderated by yours truly, and I'm
Maybe.
excited. Yeah. They spent 4 hours talking about Star Fox Adventure. I'm just kidding.
A game that Tyler still hasn't even played.
And Steven said he's never coming back. So
Wow. It was very heated.
no, yeah.
Kent also goes on to talk a little bit more smack about some of my favorite GameCube games, like Mario Sunshine, which I maintain is a wonderful game, even if it didn't quite live up to the masterpiece of Mario 64. He talks about how the camera's bad and the flood is not fun, but I disagree. Well, the camera is bad, but I disagree that the flood is not fun.
I mean, it teaches you about cleaning up pollution.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I'm actually, full disclosure, I started playing it and I stopped. It's the third game I haven't beaten on Mario 3D All-Stars. I've beaten the other two. And the reason I stopped is I think I just got Mario'd out. You know what I mean? Like, I'll come back to it eventually. I don't think it's a bad game. I think it's actually kind of neat, and I like the flood mechanic. Yeah. I really like that, but I do agree the camera is infuriating at times.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not trying to say Sunshine is the greatest Mario game ever made. That is Super Mario 3D
Well, I
World.
just tweeted that, so I don't know what to do. We can't go back on it. So, yep, sorry about your bad luck. Can't do it.
Well, I think it was good, and I don't think it is a black mark on the permanent record of Mario games. I think Mario Sunshine is very fun still.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a bad game by any means. It's just not as good as like Galaxy. Is just
Galaxy's great.
Are they going to remake 2? They're going to remake Galaxy 2, right? Because that's what I'm waiting on.
It's even better than the first one, I think.
I know you've talked about it so much, and I loved Galaxy 1, so I'm just waiting. I'm just sitting here waiting.
So But wait, there's more mistakes that the GameCube made. And that was, in this time period, Nintendo's lack of respect for online gaming. So the Xbox had a built-in Ethernet port, right? And they were just starting to get Xbox Live off the ground. Sony was starting to make the network adapter kit available for PS2 owners if they wanted to play games online. But Nintendo didn't really embrace the online aspect of gaming. They released a 56K modem for the GameCube, which was fine, I guess. Even the network adapter kit for the PlayStation 2 had a 56K modem built in as well. So that wasn't the best way to play online, but I guess it was something. And they also released an Ethernet-based broadband adapter, so you could use that. But in the US, only the Phantasy Star Online series by Sega would go online. There were a couple other games in Japan that went online with the broadband adapter, I think one or two more. But it was really just Phantasy Star Online 1 and 2, and then the third one, the Card Revolution one. I didn't play that one. But those are the only ones that actually went online on GameCube. There were a few other games. 1080, Avalanche, Kirby Air Ride, and Mario Kart Double Dash had System Link support if you had the broadband adapter. So you could link your GameCubes together and play System Link, which is kind of cool. And if you were good at computers and savvy, you could finagle that into playing online if you had a computer that would tunnel it for you. So you can still do that today. I think you can play those games online with the 4 people that play them online, I guess. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo is still, you could argue it's still not very great with online gaming. So,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So overall, they really just didn't care about online gaming in this generation. It wasn't a deal breaker during that generation of consoles, so they could get away with that. Most people weren't playing games online. Halo 2 would go on to sort of really popularize playing games online. But even then, that was kind of the only game people played online in a large number. But it was a defining feature of the next generation of consoles. And Nintendo's full generation of lagging behind meant that they constantly would contend with their online functionality being years behind the competition. And some say, and Mike is included in this, that they're still behind to this day. And I say that too. I say they're still behind to this day. Nintendo Switch Online, yeah. It's not even that they're behind. It's almost that they're purposefully making it more difficult than it has to be.
Yeah, you just took the words out of my mouth. 100%. It's just so hard just to connect to your friend. I need a friend code. What is this?
Yeah, that's not behind as in back in the day we used friend codes and Nintendo just never got past that. It's no, you actively made this worse than it needed to be.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with you. Trying to connect for Animal Crossing during the worst parts of COVID when you just want to talk to people was so difficult. It's just why is this hard? Yeah.
So, but the one thing I do agree with Kent on here is that he talks about his feelings around Zelda, the Wind Waker, and gamers' feelings as well, and how they sort of reversed from how they were feeling when the game was first shown at E3. And the art style was not received very well because people were hoping for that more realistic art style that they'd seen in the tech demo, and so people were making fun of this new Zelda game. Everybody thought it was going to be terrible, but the game came out and it got really good reviews. People loved it, and I think the game is great. The sailing is super fun, and I love the music that plays when you sail across the Great Sea. It's some of my favorite overworld music in any game because it really nails the sailing off into adventure feeling, Dude, did you play Wind Waker?
No, this is the one that I'm really, really, really waiting for the HD remake of because they're gonna make one. They have to. And I'm
they did for the Wii U.
Yeah, okay. Well, in that case, it's not going to come to the Switch, so I might need to just buy I have a GameCube, so I might need to go find a GameCube copy and just play it on GameCube.
Yeah,
honestly.
It's worth playing the Wii U remake. There are emulators that can play it, assuming you legally purchase the game.
I could own a legal copy of the game, yes.
Yeah. But there's a couple of quality of life things the Wii U version has. There's a faster sail that you get really early on that just makes sailing faster, which is just better.
You want to go fast. We all do.
Yeah. Plus, it looks better, I think. But some people would disagree.
Hey, I part of me, for the collector's sake, has wondered if I should go try to find a Wii U just to have a Wii U as a video game person.
Yeah.
And this might make me lean into it a little more.
Yeah.
So
it's a really good Nintendo console to have because especially if you hack it and do some soft mods on it and stuff, you can play GameCube games, you can play Wii games, and you can play Wii U games obviously on it. And then there's emulators for Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, and all that. You could just make this the ultimate Nintendo system besides the Switch, which is pretty cool.
That is really cool. I'm into it.
But yeah, so also around this time though, Peter McDougal needed to leave for health reasons, which was kind of unfortunate. But his replacement was our best friend, Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Oh, Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Mike, did I ever tell you about the time I almost met Reggie?
I don't think so. Or
Well,
have you?
I'm going to tell you again, even if I didn't tell you the first time. I was at PAX in like 2010 probably, and this was about whenever they were close to releasing the triple pack of Metroid Prime for the Wii with all 3 Metroid Prime games on it. And I went to the Nintendo booth and I was like, I'm going to wait in this really long line and I'm going to play with motion controls the Metroid Prime game, and I'm going to get the sweet Metroid Prime t-shirt. And so I did that. I waited in line, and while I was there, I saw Reggie also at the booth. And there's like a line, people like hanging out with him. And a friend of mine, Devin, might have been my roommate at the time. Might not have been my roommate at the time. I lived with him later. We made the conscious decision to stay in the line to play Metroid Prime instead of meeting Reggie Fils-Aimé. And we got the t-shirt, and forever from that day on, we were just like, this is the t-shirt that reminds us that we could have met Reggie Fils-Aimé, but chose not to. But chose to play 3 games we'd already played before, because it was just a re-release of these games.
Like a true gamer. You did it for the games.
Did it for the games, did it for the t-shirt. I still have that t-shirt, but I'll never forget that story.
Yeah.
It's not a great story.
What if we got Reggie Fils-Aimé on the podcast? Do you think Steven could maybe hook us up?
That would be very cathartic for me if we got Reggie on the podcast.
That would really give you some closure that we desperately need.
Yeah, we'd get Reggie on the podcast, and we'd get Devin on here, and we'd just say thank you for meeting with us, Mr. Fils-Aimé.
I say we because now I need you to meet Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Yeah.
I'm invested in this for you.
Well, he's retired now, so it's probably more difficult.
So he's got time to podcast.
Yeah, that's a good point. So anyway, Reggie is the new guy here, and people were skeptical at first because he wasn't a games guy. He ran Panda Express, he ran the American arm of like the Guinness Brewery, and like he did some other stuff that were not games. So I was like, what does this guy know about games?
We got to do a timeout. That means Reggie Fils-Aimé has worked at 3 companies that I have very much put a lot of money into over the years. So I am even more invested now in Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Yeah. He didn't know anything about games though, and people were like, okay, what's this guy doing here? He was big, like he's very tall, just a large person, but he was pretty soft-spoken, kind of like RoccoW or McDougal. But Kent says that he was, quote, a Madison Avenue bull entering a West Coast culture, which was exactly what Nintendo of America needed at the time. So then he went on stage at E3 in 2004. Do you remember? Because I do. We talked about it in our E3 Moments episode. He went up on stage and he said, quote, my name's Reggie. I'm about kicking ass. I'm about taking names, and we're about making games. And everybody stood up and clapped, and that man on the stage's name was Albert Einstein, or Reggie Fils-Aimé. But everybody loved that. And it's kind of funny because his onstage persona wasn't really what he was like behind the scenes, but I just love him. I love his onstage persona, and I kind of like that he's a bit more of a reserved, like soft-spoken guy behind the scenes too.
I also like that. I feel like over time, like he entered Nintendo not really a games person, but you felt like he became a games person slowly over time, which was like,
yeah,
you want to know that the person like in charge of the thing you love is like also loves it, which is it's cool to watch someone change and become that person.
Yeah, for sure.
Big Reggie Fils-Aimé's fans. We are
big Reggie Fils-Aimé fan, but it wasn't enough. At the end of 2004, it was 9.1 million GameCubes sold, which is a lot of GameCubes, but compared to 11.8 Xboxes and 26.6 million PS2s, it's not a whole lot. Sony literally sold more PS2s than Xboxes and GameCubes combined, which is pretty crazy. So once we get to the 7th generation of consoles, though, we'll see what Sony did with the PS3, and we'll see how that turns out. Some hubris, maybe. Some going into thinking a little big head, an ego.
There hubris going on?
Yeah.
Some hubris. I like to say it that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's chapter 6 of The Ultimate History of Video Games Part 2 by Stephen L. Kent. Make sure you read the book because we left out a lot of stuff. And we still got an hour's worth of talking about it. So
this book is just it's really doing it for me. It's giving me the feels like we did when we first started, Tyler. Oh,
yeah,
this is nice.
I love this book.
I do too. I love it, and it's also going to look so good on my shelf right next to the other one when I'm done reading it along with the podcast.
Yep.
So I'm excited.
Yeah. What you been playing, Mike?
Well, I am so glad you asked, Tyler. We've been playing a lot of Destiny together. Which is fun.
We're back into it.
We're back into the game again. But I have also just picked up some more Zelda today, and I got the first Sacred Flame for my Master Sword.
Is this Skyward Sword?
This is Skyward Sword. Yep.
Nice.
Playing it again. Super big fan of it. I purchased for a Halloween as a little gift for me because it was $20, and I know this is not the best game, but I've always wanted to play that Ghostbusters game that came out when we were like in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah.
And they remastered it and they re-released it on Switch like 3 or 4 years ago. And so I got that game for $20. So I have the hard copy of that. So when I'm done with Zelda, I'm just going to switch that right on out and start with Ghostbusters. So now I have some like excitement of why I want to beat this Zelda game. So I'm going to put a lot of hours into it this week. I think I have some free time at night. I'm going to try to like really beat Zelda Skyward Sword HD because I'm really loving it. But what have you been playing this week?
Mostly Destiny in my free time. I've been playing a lot of Destiny with you and some other friends. We're trying to get raid ready so we can do maybe Vault of Glass or Deep Stone Crypt.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we had 2 people reach out that want to play raids with us from the podcast, so we will talk to them. That's good.
Cool. Awesome.
We might even have like, I might get benched. You know, we might have so many people that you could bench me. I get it. I understand, but I'm excited. I'll be there for moral support. Do
some raiding for sure. Trying to think of what else I've been playing. I think that's really it. I think most of my time's been being put into that. And maybe there's I put a few. I didn't put a lot of time into it, but I am digging the game Fantasian on the Apple App Store on Apple Arcade for iOS devices, TV included. It is made by a lot of the same people that do Final Fantasy games, that did the older Final Fantasy games, and it is a really fun JRPG that all of the backgrounds are like handmade and photographed, like dioramas that they made out of clay and stuff. That's really, really cool.
Fantasian. Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah, so it's beautiful. And if you have Apple Arcade subscription, which is like $5 a month, then you just download it.
Yeah.
It's for free.
Fantasian. All right, I'll look it up. That's really great.
Pretty neat. Yeah, it's a fun little JRPG to play on your phone.
We got a few emails to read here, so we're going to get going with those. That's cool. I'll get the first one from Tyler. Not you, Tyler, different Tyler. Hey guys, Tyler from Colorado here. I just wanted to ask Tyler, this is you, Tyler, an opinion about Final Fantasy. I feel like he may have touched on it in the past, but I probably just forgot. Recently, they added Final Fantasy 13 to Game Pass, so I've been playing through it on PC, and it is much better on PC than I expected. I tried Final Fantasy 12 on PC when it was on Game Pass and couldn't stand the controls. I may have quit too early on it, but with so many Final Fantasies to choose from, I decided, why waste my time? The question I had was if he's tried Final Fantasy 12 on PC and what he thought. Did you try it? Do you want me to pause here?
I have tried it on PC, and I put in 15 or 16 hours into it. I really like it. I don't find the controls weird at all. The battle system is certainly the most different from any Final Fantasy game I've ever played, I think. Mainline Final Fantasy game. I love that it's kind of built around programming your squad to like make the game play itself. Like if you can walk through a battle and not have to tell it to do anything, then that's sort of a success, I think. Which some people don't like because they like to actually play their games. So I get it. But I got stuck on a boss, I think, and for some reason I ended up putting it down. But I have been meaning to pick it back up recently because I got that handheld PC thing, and I can pick up right where I left off. So yeah, that might be the next JRPG I blast through. I need to beat Persona 5 Strikers. I've still got Persona 4 playthrough that I'm working on. So I don't know, too many JRPGs.
Too many JRPGs.
I love 12. I do really like 12.
Good to know. So Tyler goes on to say, also, my favorite Final Fantasy games are 8 and 13. I get so much flack for it because people hate those two so passionately. I love the junction system on 8 and my edge boy Squall, and I love female Squall on Final Fantasy 13 too. I was curious if he agreed those two are as bad as people say, or if Final Fantasy fans are a bit difficult to please because I like 15 too. People weren't huge fans of either. Maybe I have bad taste.
Oh, well, if you've come to me for your Final Fantasy hot takes, I hope that I won't disappoint. I'm personally not a huge fan of 8 because I think the junctioning system, I think it's a cool idea, but there are ways to break it really early on in the game that just give you that make you just super powerful. And I think the fact that while you level up with experience points, the enemies level up with you too. So actually, if you get to like level 100, which is the max, the final boss is so difficult if you're level 100. And if you can get through the game without leveling up, the final boss is so much easier. And I find that counterintuitive, and I really don't like that.
That's what messed me up. When I played Final Fantasy VIII, I got through the first disc, and I put the second disc in, and I was leveling like I thought you're supposed to. Yep. And I got to a part I just couldn't beat it. And I tried it so many times, and I never played it again. And I really never played a Final Fantasy game again after that, honestly, because I was just so upset as a teenager playing that. Like, it bummed me out.
Yeah, the game doesn't tell you. I remember when my brother played through it the first time and he's like, I still can't beat the final boss. Well, okay, I'm going to go out here and do some level grinding. And he was just making it harder for himself.
Yeah, see, that's a hot bummer right there.
Yeah. So there are some things you can do in the beginning of that game that get you some spells you're not really supposed to have until later. And then if you junction those to like your attack spells, for Squall, you end up doing tons and tons of damage. And anyway, there's a whole... I beat the game doing some cheese stuff, and so maybe I shouldn't have cheesed it, but it's hard not to cheese when you know the cheese exists, you know?
Yeah, no, I get it.
But 13, I love. 13 is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. I love the battle system in that game. It's definitely a bit of a hallway simulator of just running down corridors. I get that. That's a fair criticism when people give it that criticism. I think that's fair. 10 is similar in that way. But I still love both of those games, and I did really like 15 as well. I need to go back and play all the DLC because I played the game when it first came out, and it was missing a bunch of DLC. And I think there was an update to the game that changes like the last chapter of that game too, to be a bit more of a better ending, and because it really feels like they put all their time into like the first half of that game, or the first like 3/4 of that game, and then the last like chapter is sort of on rails, and it just feels like they were like, oh shoot, we ran out of time, better finish the game. Which I understand is better now. I think they've patched it, so I need to play that one again. But I do love 15 as well. So,
all right. There, Tyler, you got your Final Fantasy takes there.
Yeah.
It's good. All right. So now he goes on to say, now for Dead Space. A couple weeks ago, you guys talked about games you've replayed the most. For me, it's by far Dead Space and Dead Space 2. Got platinum in both, and now they are remaking Dead Space. EA promised they won't ruin it with microtransactions. I'm hoping this is a step in the right direction with EA releasing a single-player game with no microtransactions, and I'm all aboard the hype train big time. Fun fact, Dead Space is how I learned about console exclusives back in the day. My mom took me to buy Left 4 Dead. I had PlayStation, and the guy at the Walmart told me I couldn't play it. Young me was so confused and disappointed, so my mom got me Dead Space instead, and it ended up being a much better outcome for me. Don't at me, Left 4 Dead fans. I'm sorry, I'll play it someday. Sorry for the long email, but thanks for reading, Tyler.
Left 4 Dead is great.
But hey, it's good. It's cool that you couldn't get Left 4 Dead, but you just found a game. Also, honestly, if you were playing it by yourself, Left 4 Dead is not the game anyway. Dead Space was probably the better game to play it by. Yeah. I'm assuming this is a single player
yourself,
experience.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think, you know what? Console exclusivity might have saved Tyler from Colorado here. So Thank you for the email. Tyler also has a PS I'm just going to skip to right now, where he says, Tyler again, I just listened to the most recent episode and just wanted to say, I agree with Tyler, steel books are great. When I was in college, I worked at GameStop. People would always trade in their steelbooks, and they would let me, if I had the same game, trade out my regular case for the steel one. I really miss that perk. That's an awesome story. Nice.
Yeah, I love steelbooks because it's a cool way to have like a neat, like a special version of a game that doesn't take up any more space than the original.
Yeah, because you got to have that room on that shelf. Well, do you want to read John's email?
Yeah. We got John from the Philippines. John says, hi guys, this is going to be a long one, but you asked for emails regarding gamers in different countries, so here's one from the Philippines. Yes. I think the most popular games right now here are mobile games. Mobile Legends and Genshin Impact are the hottest ones currently, I believe. Personally, I used to play Call of Duty Mobile and PUBG. On the PC, I think Valorant is one of the more popular online games here. I admit this is just based on my observation as I don't play online games myself that much, but I see enough people playing those. On the consoles, well, sorry to burst your bubble, but FIFA is fairly unknown here.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm sure there are both football and American football fans here, but basketball is the dominating sport in our country. Okay, so it's all about NBA then, I guess. NBA 2K games are really popular here. That's what he says. So much so that when I was looking for a secondhand Switch, most came bundled with an NBA 2K game. As for what we play, I think in general, what we play here are in line with what they play in the USA. That's
cool that NBA 2K is really big there.
Yeah, that's great. That said, we are located in a very interesting position on the map. We are more or less in the middle of Europe, USA, and Japan. As such, we get games from all three areas. While most of our games are Region 3 games, I have seen R1, that's USA games, sold in local shops as well as Japanese games. And while it's rare that we get R2, Europe games, it's not unheard of. If I remember correctly, a friend of mine purchased an R2 exclusive version of a game in a local gaming shop. It's also an extra bonus that we have shipping services that are relatively affordable that allows us to shop from those three areas. As such, me and my partner have American, Japanese, European, and Korean exclusive video games and video game collectibles that we were able to get for cheap. Oh, and my partner also loves collecting steelbooks, and one thing I learned is to constantly check them for rust, as those buggers kind of sneak up. Interesting. I've never thought to check my steelbooks for rust.
Now Tyler's got something he can do tonight, for 2
Yeah.
hours. Check those
Going back
steelbooks.
through my steelbooks for Rust. Wow.
Make sure they don't rust.
Anyway, these are just my personal views. If there are other listeners out there from the Philippines, please correct me if I said something incorrect. And as always, stay safe and keep gaming. P.S. I think if we're talking of most important games, I would like to propose Tetris and Super Mario, the NES/Famicom. Tetris is what made the Game Boy sell like hotcakes, which in turn made handheld gaming popular. I remember a quote from some Nintendo exec who said, "If you want to sell the Game Boy to gamers, bundle it with Super Mario. If you want to sell the Game Boy to everyone, bundle it with Tetris." And he was right. Tetris remains the best-selling game of all time. Wiki lists its different iterations separately, but other lists show it at number 1. By the way, I'm not sure if you've made an episode on it yet, but how Tetris got into Nintendo's hands is a very interesting story, and I highly suggest you look into it. There's a lot of legal stuff that goes on there.
Didn't we talk about that in the Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 1?
I think so. I feel like that the Volume 1 goes into the story of Tetris.
It kind of goes into how the person that created Tetris didn't really get credit for it, which is kind of a bummer, because that game is, amazingly amazing and one of the best-selling game of all time or whatever. Yeah. So, it hurts.
The last thing that John from the Philippines says here is, as for Super Mario, this one is kind of USA-centric, but I think it did save them from the video game crash of 1983. Who knows what would have happened if Nintendo didn't use Super Mario to revive the, at the time, dead/dying video game market. And I agree. I think if you want to point to one game that saved the industry from the crash in 1982, 1983, it was Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a good point. That's a great email, John. Thank you for letting us know what game is like in the Philippines.
Yeah, that's so cool that they're able to get stuff from Europe, Japan, and America. Like, they can just get stuff from everywhere. That's really awesome.
Yeah, that is really cool. So I think we're going to call it there with the emails. We have more emails to read. We'll read them next time just because we're running out of time here. But if you want to send us an email, you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can join our Discord. You can go to my Twitter at mecoletta, MECOLETTA, and click on the pinned tweet at the top of my profile. That's a link that never expires, an invitation. And if you want to tweet at Tyler and complain that he likes Final Fantasy 13, it's at SneakerElf, ELPH. There you go.
I will fight you.
And with that, I think that's what we're going to do today. So next week, we'll do Chapter 7 for sure, and we'll see how far we get into 8. But yeah, do you want to say bye to everyone, Tyler?
Yeah, goodbye, everybody.